Yeah, we're a minute
on the
away.
table already.
Okay, so we're on page 185. I notice that we're getting towards the end of this packet. That's very interesting. Gonna have to figure out what to do next. And actually, just at the very bottom, we went through this very quickly last time, so let's review. Page 185. We're sort of back on track. We'd had some side discussions about do prayers work and do miracles happen. So we're sort of done with that stuff. And we're back to discussion of the Mishnah. The discussion of the Mishnah is when can you get out of the contract if you're a sharecropper and it turns out your field is not yielding anything. How long do you have to stick with it? So now we're back to that discussion. So 185 at the very bottom, then we're going to switch to the next page. So it's on number 7. Tanichada, right. Tanichada, so one baraita. When it says that, when it uses that formulation, one, Tanichada is one, it means that there's going to be a contradiction that we have to resolve. So Tanichada, Pam Rishona, Ushniya, Zorah, Ushlishit, Eno Zorah. So if you plant once, twice, nothing happens, the third time you're allowed to stop. You can get out of the contract. Even if the contract obligates you for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, whatever it obligates you for. What this says after two times, after 2 times. 2 poor crops. Important to understand a verb that's there is you have to put in the effort. If you sowed, so you planted, presumably you planted and you harvested, you tried to find whatever you could, once, twice, the third time you don't have to do it. Okay? That's one opinion. Tanya idach, shlishit zorah, Rivi'it eno zorah. But another teaching is that you have to actually do it 3 times, and the 4th time you can stop. Okay? So it's a simple mix of opinions, difference of opinions. So one says, yeah, right, but not very complicated, although we'll complicate it in a second. But one rabbi says twice, one says 3 times, and then you can stop. Okay. Now, I'll just keep in mind the mind of the Talmud would prefer that there not be any conflicts at all, so everybody could disagree. So if there's a way that we can resolve these conflicts so they make sense, but they don't contradict each other, then that would be the best. So that's generally the first attempt to understanding these 2 conflicts. You may end up in a situation where it's just 2 different opinions and you can't resolve them. But first, let's see if we can resolve them, okay? Lo kasha. So the first thing I say is they do not conflict. It's not a difficulty. Ha kirabi. So I said one actually follows a system. This is a whole different system. So interesting. You'll see not having to do with crops necessarily, but a whole wider system according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. That was Rabbi. Ha kirabi Shimon ben Gamliel. And the other opinion in this particular system follows Shimon ben Gamliel. Okay, and now I'll tell you what the system is. Ha kirabi de Amar. The system of Rabbi is, as he said, Bitrei zimne have chazakah. If something happens twice, you're allowed to call it, to classify it. That's a very important term here. It's actually very important for people that come to synagogue regularly. You're allowed to call it a chazakah, or as we used to call it a chazaka. Chazaka is the Shivish pronunciation of it. Hebrew is chazaka. So a chazaka is an assumption. So you're allowed to call something an assumption. You're allowed to assume that something is going to happen if it happens a certain amount of times. And there's 2 opinions about how you get to the chazaka. What qualifies as a chazaka? So one rabbi says if it happens twice, it's a chazaka. Chazak means strong. So it's you can be confident, strongly confident that this is going to continue to happen. And one rabbi says 3. Okay. Now we could look at the notes from Steinsaltz, and he gives a bunch of different examples. So I thought we would look at that first. We would look at the bottom 186, and then I'll tell you the most important example in synagogue life. Okay. So the dispute here between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Gamliel, I'm at the bottom where it says notes at the bottom right, regarding the number of times the same thing must occur before a presumption is established. A chazakah is a presumption that it will happen again. Has ramifications in numerous areas of the halacha. So it's not just having to do with the field. Right. So what they want to know for the field is, when is the presumption reasonable that this is just not a good field? Is it after 2 harvests or after 3 harvests? Okay, but this notion of presumption and how many times creates a pattern, and if it's a pattern, you can call it a presumption, has all sorts of ramifications in other areas. So, for instance, it is relevant, for example, with reference to the prohibition against marrying a woman who has been widowed a number of times. So if a woman has been widowed 3 times, one rabbi said, I'm not so sure you should marry her. We may have a chazakah here, a presumption that maybe you shouldn't be, that this is going to happen again. And with reference to the prohibition against circumcising a child whose older brothers died after being circumcised. So this circumcised, it's not funny, but it's if 2 children die after being circumcised, then you don't circumcise the third one because it's a presumption of chazakah. Okay, there's other ones too. So in shul life, the chazakah is your regular seat. So if a person sits there, so one rabbi would say, if you sit there, same seat twice in a row, then that's chazakah. We all have to assume that's his seat, her seat, and you're not allowed to take it. And one rabbi says it takes 3 times. So if you show up at shul and someone is sitting in your seat, and you have been in that seat more than 2 times consecutively, you're allowed to say, excuse me, sir. You say it politely. You're not allowed to say it rudely. You say it politely, I have a chazakah on that seat. It's my seat. There's a presumption now in this congregation that this is where I sit. So
we actually practice that in this congregation, don't we?
Well, that's human nature. People gravitate to the same seat. So what we have in Jewish law is that if you do it only twice and you are there, now that you can argue about what if somebody was sick for twice and it's their chazakah, then the answer is you argue about it and spend time arguing about it. But the chazakah also applies to just things that happen regularly that you can begin to presume that they're going to continue happening. Okay, so that's the chazakah here.
That's almost like a scientific experiment. Something happens at least twice, maybe it's consistent in that.
Right. Yeah, I've heard Jewish scientists use the term chazakah. We have a chazakah now. It's proof that something is going to recur.
Right.
All right. So the 2 or 3 times, they're really not very much, but that's and in some ways they actually are appealing to science too, because they're talking about a field. There could be just something wrong with this field that means that it's not going to be it's not going to be fruitful. All right, I'm going to keep going.
Because Mo has the seats.
Well, you can look around the table. You can see it. So, sometimes, yeah. Or it's not just Shabbat. It's morning minyan too. People sit in the same place. I'm sure it's true in churches too.
Because the memories are failing, we have to.
Yeah. Anyhow, so Shimon Gamliel Demar betlat zimnei havechazakah. So these 2 rabbis do disagree with each other, but only because the 2 rabbis talking about the fields, they disagree with each other only because there is a larger disagreement about the notion of patterns in the first place, of chazakah in the first place. So one rabbi follows the classic Rabbi, who says a pattern is only 2 times, and one is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who says you need 3 times to constitute a chazakah, a presumption, a pattern. Okay, and that makes us feel better about the disagreement, since it's a larger disagreement. It's not just about, so that's okay. There's 2 systems of thought here at work, and people fall into the 2 systems of thought. Okay, page 187. Continue. Amar Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish, a long time later, so generations later, after approximately 500 years later, after Rabbi and Shimon ben Gamliel, Lo Shanu Ella. So the whole thing about you can stop working a field after either 2 or 3 times, depending which rabbi you follow, only counts Ella she zira'a vitsamcha ve'achala chagav. So it only counts, in other words, you can only stop planting, get out of your contract, if you sowed, but also you allowed things to grow, so they grew, and then some disaster hit, and they give an example of the disaster of locusts come. So if locusts infest your crop 2 times or 3 times, depending which rabbi, you have to go through the work of planting and actually watching the things grow, and then having the natural disaster come and strike. At that point, you can get out of the contract. But, so aval, zira'ah v'lo tzamcha. But if you planted and you didn't wait long enough for the crops to grow, or you come to it, or let's say you didn't plant at all. All right, at that point, matzeh amar le bala karka. Then the owner of the field can say to you, kol yemei zera zra'av la'azil, says that you didn't wait long enough And you have to wait for the entire growing season to come before you give up. So what could happen is that the sharecropper could plant and then wait a couple months and say, hey, look, nothing grew. So I'm getting out of this contract. And the landowner is allowed to say you didn't wait long enough because there's, you'll see it explains it for a second, but you have to wait longer. Okay? And the only way you can get out of the contract is if you plant and it grows, and then some natural disaster hits. Remember, that becomes our definition of a makat medina, which is a regional disaster, which allows you to get out of the contract. So if it happens, but it has to happen. It can't just be things didn't grow because you didn't wait long enough. Remember, there's also the possibility that you're just an incompetent farmer, and we always have that argument if you're the landowner. If there, in fact, is the locusts don't come. So this rabbi is saying it's only when the locusts come twice in a row, 3 times in a row, that the sharecropper can say the problem is not me, the problem is all these locusts, and that's not my problem. I can't deal with the locusts, okay? Or the weather conditions, whatever that this is just what happens at this field, okay?
Rabbi,
yeah.
If you plant and nothing grows, you wait the entire season, nothing comes up. It's possible you had defective seeds.
That's also possible too. Yeah, right. But if you do it, so that's a good point. I mean, the landowner could examine the seeds. We could ask about the seeds. So let's take a look at the seeds before we give up on the contract entirely. So what you're going to see is there's difference of opinions of what constitutes a season. And that depends on the place and the farmer. And I waited till October, nothing grew. And the landowner says, look, in this particular field, you got to wait till November, December. Then things are going to grow. But you just gave up and you stopped working the field in November. That's your fault. That's you not understanding the nature of my particular field. And in fact, the nature of seasons, which you need to understand as a farmer. Okay? Amar Rav Papa. So the question is ad emat. So now the question is, how long do you have to wait before things grow? What's a reasonable amount of time to assume enough time has passed and things have not grown? Okay? So Rav Papa now has a very interesting answer. Rav Papa says, ad da'atu arise midavra. So if someone were to ask our farmers today, look, how long do you wait before nothing is going to grow? What they're probably going to give us is a season or a date even. They'll probably say, for me, it's like February. Things stop growing. Or for me, it's like November. Okay? But, they weren't as tied to numbers and names of months in those days. So Rav Papa said, until the tenant farmers return from the field. So you look at the tenant farmers, and you look and see, it's sort of like crowdsourcing. You look and see when most of these farmers have given up, and they go back home for the season. You look around and you see, when most of them have stopped waiting for crops and they've done all of their harvesting, you have to stay and work your field until most of the farmers, your fellow sharecroppers, tenant farmers, have given up. That's what Rav Papa says. And then he gives another possibility. V'kaima kima arashahu. And the constellation Pleiades is over their heads. So then he's coming close to saying a season, almost a date. So now, of course, Steinsaltz and Rashi both explain to us what that means. So in Israel, because the constellations show up differently at different times where you are. So in Israel, and Rashi was never in Israel, so I'm not sure how he knows about Israel. He heard about it from people in Israel. But is in Israel, Pleiades is overhead in February, end of February. So their farmers are still waiting for things to grow all the way through February. And so Rav Papa says that's how long you have to wait. You have to keep working that field and expecting things to grow through until Pleiades. And evidently it's interesting. That kind of reference to time was common in those days. Where nowadays we would say about the middle of February. In those days they would refer to constellations. And everybody would know what they're talking about.
Yeah, they were much more in tune with what was going on in the heavens.
Right.
What's that?
Yeah.
They were much more in tune with constellations and using constellations to give them a sense of the passing of time and seasons.
Less access to paper calendars and
Yes.
other things. I mean, that's the only way.
Yeah, well, right. So now we've got phones, that tell us the calendars and paper, and so they would look at the sky. Same thing with what other things got? My mind just goes. No, when you look at time of day, it's a
Watch.
Yeah, we look at watch. Well, watches they would look at what are they called? Sundials.
Sundials.
Sundials is very common in ancient times. The rabbis referred to sundials all the time. They didn't wear wristwatches, but they had sundials. Now you need a sunny climate for sun, and it was sunny enough in Israel that they could use sundials. Yeah.
Is it February is not the end of the season?
Yeah.
The end of the season's October. Why the?
Yeah.
They grew winter wheat, no?
Yes, because there are crops that grow in the winter. But we're going to get to exactly that. So let's keep going.
I'll wait.
Yeah. In fact, that's so Meitvei, an objection to this, comes Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Mishum Rabbi Meir. Before we get to the objection, it's very interesting because the objection could be based on what Paul just said, coming from the expertise of a farmer. So wait a second, do crops actually grow in February? Okay, so there's one. Remember, there's always two ways in the Talmud of acquiring knowledge. One is your own practical experience. What's the other?
Having heard it from somebody.
Scripture.
Oh.
Right, so there are two authorities. The one authority is your own experience. The other is the Torah tells us things. So the Torah itself tells us and describes for us the seasons. In a very famous, very important verse, after the flood, there's a rainbow, remember? So they come out of the ark, and God tells Noah, this will never happen again. Now, there's actually a very interesting and specific way that God makes that promise, and you have it here. This is a reverse Rabban Gamliel is referring to, although it's not quoted in the Talmud, but Steinsaltz quotes it because it's what we're referring to. Okay, so if you look on page 187 on the left, at the bottom paragraph where it says translation and commentary, this is the verse 8:22 in Genesis, where God promises this: while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Okay? So that's the verse, and that verse is promising that it's not just that God will not send a flood again. That's why it's deeper than that. What God's promising is the natural cycles of nature will never be interrupted. I will never, through the use of my supernatural powers, interrupt the natural cycle of nature again. I am promising I will never interfere with nature again. And now he describes how nature works. And what rabbis do is they count the periods of time mentioned in that verse and saying those are the periods of time that God is promising never to intervene with again. In other words, those are the seasons, and there are 6 of them. We think that there are 4, but in fact there are 6. Let's count them. Seed time 1, harvest 2, cold 3, heat 4, summer 5, winter 6. And then day and night refer to just the 24-hour cycle. Okay. So the rabbis infer from this that there are 6 seasons. Now, why does that matter? It's all about planting. That's all they really cared about. And so there's 6 distinct seasons with reference to farmers, which actually, in some ways it follows some reality too. There's not just 4 seasons for farmers. Farmers are planting and harvesting all the time according to different rhythms. Anyway, they take that verse and they apply it to the rhythms of a farmer.
Is that serially?
Yeah.
Well, because the heat, the heat comes during growing, not after.
Yes, I admit that it's not logical the way we look at it right now, and it may not even be what the verse means. I mean, the verse may just be waxing poetic. Right. I'm never going to stop the cycle of seasons anymore. However, the rabbis take it literally and sequentially, like you said. Now we'll explain it. Okay, because they also understood there was issues, but they understood some of these words differently too. I mean, a word could mean hot, but it also could mean a season. Right. So, well, you'll see. We'll have time today. Yeah.
Tu B'Shvat is the New Year of the trees, which is like the months before Adar.
Yeah, right? It's early. It's early February.
Early February.
So it's cold. Even in Israel, it's cold.
Right, but the almond trees are blooming,
right?
And they still are blooming.
Yeah.
I was there once.
Yeah,
That's when they begin to bloom.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to think of that as a season.
It does, right? Exactly. So that's what there's, and that's more than it's midwinter for us, but in fact it's a distinct season if you look at the almond trees because something new is happening. Okay, well let's take a look.
Well, that was the rainy season, and we know from the newspaper this week that almonds require a lot of water.
They do. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Mishum Rabbi Meir. So this is the objection. Omer, V'kenaya Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Omer Kidvarav, and actually came from Shimon the son of Manasseh. This is what he said. Now he defines the seasons. Here are the seasons. Chatzi Tishrei, the middle of Tishrei, that's a season. Mar Cheshvan, so that's the next month. Remember, notice that they don't call, we call the month actually Cheshvan, but they refer to it as Mar Cheshvan.
No
and probably the original name of the month was Mar Cheshvan, which was a Babylonian name. We make a little midrash that you have the month is called Cheshvan, and then you put the word Mar in front of it, which means bitter. Why is that month bitter? Bitter? Because it has no holidays. It's actually the only month of the year that doesn't have any kind of Jewish significance. So, it's such a bitter month. But that's just a play on words. In fact, the original name of the month is Mar Cheshvan, and it doesn't have a meaning in Hebrew at all. It's a Babylonian word. Okay, Mar Cheshvan, the Chatzi Kislev, and half of Kislev. So half of Tishrei, half of Cheshvan. All of Cheshvan and half of Kislev. We call that the season of Zerah, which means planting, but it's just the name of a month. It's the name of a season. Now, it happens to be a season where maybe you would do a lot of planting. I don't know, I'm not a farmer, but you would do a lot of planting during that time because the name of the season is called planting, Zara. Now, Chatzi Kislev, half of Kislev, Tevet, which is the next month, the Chatzi Shvat, and half of Shvat, in other words, right until Tu B'Shvat, because it comes right in the middle of Shvat, we call that Choref, which nowadays we call winter, but they're calling it Choref. Okay. Now, Chatzi Shvat, half of Shvat, Adar, the poor month, and Chatzi Nisan, half of Nisan. In other words, right until Pesach, which comes right in the middle of Nisan, we call that Kor. That's called cold. Okay? I don't know if you're keeping track up to now, but so far we've got three. We've got planting, we've got winter, now we've got cold. What's the difference between winter and cold? I don't know. You have to live through it to see it. But you can feel in the climate a difference. And for them, it's much less about the coats that you would wear than about what's happening in the soil, because that was much more important to them. Okay?
Pesach is one of the harvest festivals.
Yeah, they're calling that, though, cold.
Right,
so,
but what I mean is, do you think that's the end
it's the end of a season. It's the end of a season. Yeah. All right, now, Chatzi Nisan, half of Nisan, Iyar, which is the month that we're in now, right? Iyar. And then Chatzi Sivan, half of Sivan, that's called Katsir. That's called harvest. So, for them, maybe that's when most of the harvesting would happen.
Right.
Which I think
is... Shavuot is also.
Yes, Shavuot is a harvest, and it takes you through Shavuot, and a little bit more, okay? Now, Chatzi Sivan, half of Sivan, Tammuz, Chatzi Av, and half of Av. So those are, for us, that's actually the summer. Kaitz. What do you know? That's called Kaitz. That's called summer. And then you've got Chatzi Av, half of Av, Elul, which is like our August, the Chatzi Tishrei, and the Chatzi Tishrei is where we started before, Chom, the hot months. And by the way, in Israel, those often can be the hottest. September can be hotter than July in Israel and other places too. So, but you call that hot. So they end up with, that's 6 seasons altogether. Okay? So Rabbi Yehuda so that's one way. That's one way one rabbi counts the seasons. All we have in the Torah is that there's 6 seasons. Now you have to start, when to not. Rabbi Yehuda, for instance, Monem be Tishrei. Rabbi Yehuda starts not in half of Tishrei. It's not really clear why you start half of Tishrei, other than there's a holiday, so that way you can start with Sukkot. But Rabbi Yehuda says you start at 1 Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Shimon Monem Amar Cheshvan. Rabbi Shimon has a different system. He says you start the first month at Cheshvan, so you can be done with all the holidays. We don't have all the holidays interfering, and we'll start the year at Cheshvan. Okay. Now, mine make hell bekulu, because you have all these different systems about when you start the calendar. Who has now they call this the most lenient system. So the most lenient at this point means extending the season farthest. So it's most lenient with regard to the landowner, because the landowner wants his tenant farmer, his sharecropper, to wait the longest, so he doesn't get out of the contract. Right. Okay? So we look at all these different systems. Who has the longest possibility of waiting until something grows? Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon, who we started with. Okay? So if you look at Rabbi Shimon, Katsir, the planting for him, the harvesting for him ends in Sivan. So Sivan is early summer, okay? But this is the whole objection. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel told us you need to wait until Pleiades is in the sky. So when Pleiades is in the sky, it's February, right? That's a pretty big contradiction. So one rabbi is saying the typical harvest season ends in Sivan, which is June. And one rabbi says, no, the tenant farmers don't go home until Pleiades is in the sky, which is in February. Okay? So we've got a problem. Very different. I mean, it's very, how could you possibly, and actually it's exactly what Paul was saying. How could you possibly say that there could be a harvest in February? And if you grew up in Cleveland, who's harvesting in February? It's covered with snow. The thing is, not everybody grew up in Cleveland, and there are winter crops. So there's actually going to be a very simple explanation of this, which is that when you plant different things, and that's how we're going to get to it. Rabbi Shimon v'kulei hai lo kamar. So there's nobody that's close to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, to Rav Papa, who says that you can harvest in, even the most, the guy that stretches it the farthest would never come to the saying that there's a harvest in February. Okay? But now 189. I think you're getting to the end of the packet. Lo kasha, it's not a conflict. Ha de kabalamine becharpe. Ha de kabalamine be'afle. So really, basically, it says there are some crops that you harvest before winter, but there are some that you can actually harvest even until Adar, which is about the February. Okay? And then I believe that Steinsaltz gives a couple examples. Yes, so field release, early crops such as wheat and rye are sown before the beginning of winter. Rav Papa is referring to where the field was leased for raising late crops such as barley. So barley, apparently, I don't know this stuff, but apparently barley you can be harvesting all the way into the winter in February. And pulse, I'm not even sure what pulse means. Anybody know what pulse is? It's a crop.
I think it's a legume, but I'm not.
A legume, yeah, I think it's that's right. It's a bean, a kind of bean that they because it comes up in the Talmud occasionally. Okay, so in other words, there are winter harvests, and Rav Papa says that it doesn't matter really what you're planting. At some point, if you're planting a winter crop, give it the whole winter to see if it's going to come up, even if it's snowing, before you give up. Okay?
It doesn't snow much.
Yeah. Right. Is that clear? Any questions about this? Because we're going to switch we're switching subjects. So I'll start the new subject, then we'll stop. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im kibla mimenu b'ma'ot. So switching the subject, if you remember, the Mishnah talks about two ways that the tenant farmer pays the landowner. One is a percentage of the crop, and one is simply a cash amount, it's not a percentage at all. I'm giving you $300 a month to use this. Right, no matter how much I get nothing, I give you $300. I make $10,000, I give you $300. It's not a percentage. There are two ways of doing it. Everything we've talked to about right now, how the farmer can get out of the contract, can he deduct or not deduct, everything we've talked about right now, up until now, has only been with reference to a percentage amount. If the agreement is a fixed amount, none of this holds, and you have to pay it no matter what. It doesn't matter if there's locusts that come. It doesn't matter if the field just comes up dry. It's 10. If it's 10 years and you've agreed to pay $300 a month, you can't get out of it. Now, why that's the case, I'm not sure. Well, it has to do with the kind of risks that both are taking on. But now we're going to talk about the case where are there possibilities that the tenant farmer can deduct from his rent if he agreed previously to a fixed amount as opposed to a percentage. Okay, everything we've talked about right now has been with reference to percentage, not a fixed amount. Okay, and we'll get to that next week.